It's really, really good to be here. I'm Andy, as you've already said. I'm from England. I'm from Nottingham. If you take a picture of Nottingham and put a pin in the middle of it, me and Diane live there. It's famous for Robin Hood, yeah. Although I don't wear tights. And it's interesting because I spend my life sitting in circles with people, getting them and helping them to think together. And I very rarely stand in front of people to tell my story and actually what I do. So it's actually a real joy to actually have the opportunity, rather than listen and help and facilitate, to actually say, actually, this is what I'm seeing across the organizations which we're kind of like working with in Nowhere, and we'll come to Nowhere. You'll notice that we wear black. Sometime in the past it felt like a good idea until today, when it's actually kind of like boiling hot, you know, but we'll come back to hot. I'm just going to take a step back. I'm going to talk about creative frequency. So we're a business which help organizations be more innovative. And I'm going to talk today about something which is very rarely spoken about in the whole of the literature about, you know, what makes up an innovation culture. And it's this kind of sense of a vibration, a sense of actually underneath an organization is a kind of a mood, a vibe, a hum, a sense which supports you or doesn't support you. So that's the kind of theme of today. We're a small business, but we kind of span a long way. You'll notice because we're English, we kind of put a big square in the middle of England because we rule the world. It's not very humble, I don't think, this map, but actually, basically, there's a team of us of 20 in the UK, and we have small teams in Australia and New Zealand, in Beijing, in Johannesburg, Vienna, and in Argentina and Uruguay, with Rodolfo and Frederica being our Nowhere team here. So we span a lot of the world, and the yellows are where our clients are, where they were when we put this map together. So we're kind of nomadic. And basically we're a community which are, if I was to say our key kind of expertise areas are psychology, educationalists, strategists, designers, and a bunch of other kind of disciplines all mixed together. But the one thing which really defines us is we're very passionate about the notion of breakthrough. So we've spent the last 20 years trying to codify what is it about the experience and the conditions which lead to new thinking. And do you know that moment where you kind of like, I don't know, walk out the shower or get out the bathtub and something new comes in? Well, we've spent 20 years trying to think about how the hell does that make that happen? And not only for individuals, but also how do teams make that happen? And how do you create businesses where that happens more frequently? So this notion of breakthrough is what we're passionate about. And we spend our lives kind of talking about this and trying to codify a practice. One of the things which we do, I think, better than most people is to not only take an academic thought, but we've tried to codify something which people can use in their everyday life. You know, so it's kind of a practice. It's a day-to-day way of working. And the things which we're interested in are three main things. One is our core practice is high-end. We spend a lot of time, and we're very privileged to work with some of the kind of the global businesses across the world. And we work with some amazing leaders, and we take transformations which take 3 years to shift the culture, shift strategy, shift the way that we work. And more recently, we've been talking about the simple things, which is what is it that leaders can do to actually create moments where breakthrough happens? And we've codified a leadership curriculum, so I'm going to talk about that. And then more deeply, we're talking about what we're calling working with the invisible, which is kind of a codified practice on how do you shift your internal energy and capacity so you vibrate differently, so actually you meet the world more creatively. And so they're the elements of our practice, high-end catalysts, what leadership development and this other framework around how do you build your inner capacity. And this journey, which it leads me to here today, started 27 years ago when I became the occupational psychologist for a company called Boots the Chemist. If you go to the UK and you one of the first shops you'll see is Boots, and you'll buy your toothpaste there and your shampoo and your cosmetics, and it's basically a health and beauty retailer. And I was appointed their first occupational psychologist many years ago now. And I remember it well because the first thing I had to do in those first few months was to recruit creative people, innovative people. And I went to my manual, because we had personality questionnaires to actually find out what a creative person looked like. And it basically said, you've got to be socially bold, you've got to be have kind of a loose relationship with rules, you've got to have a lack of conscientiousness, a little bit of free-floating anxiety, because we always like our creative people to be kind of anxious and on the edge. And we kind of recruited these kind of people, but actually they used to kind of band into my office, and even before we did the personality assessment, I knew who the creative people were and I knew who they weren't. And it was just an amazing opportunity to kind of interview all these great people. But I used to make the effort to go and see them once they'd been appointed. And so 3 months after being appointed, I would go and knock on these amazing people's doors and knock into their office, and I would say, "How are you?" And they would go, "I'm fine." And I'd go, "So how's the job?" And they'd go, "It's all right." And I go, "How's the creative challenge?" And they'd go, "It's okay." And this happened not once, twice. I mean, literally, I'm not telling you a joke here, kind of like 10, 11, 12 times over 6 months this would happen. And what I realized is actually, despite being the most creative people we could find, after 3 months, Boots was doing something to them. That actually, there was a vibe, there was something which was sucking the energy and the innovative quality from these people. And since then, I've begun to realize I actually don't think there is such thing as a creative person, that there are only creative contexts. And I think you can put anybody in a creative context and they will somehow come alive. And actually it's 90% the vibration which surrounds them and only 10% which is the kind of the unique inner quality. And I learned that at Boots. So we're talking about something which most people can experience. They're kind of like, there's a sense that actually I'm not talking about something abstract, that actually we know what it feels like. You know what this feels like when you walk into a hotel, when you walk into a school, when you walk into whatever, kind of like we have this inner sense organ which kind of allows us to sense this very clearly. This is what we're about. And what I'm basically saying is that there's organizations which help people and support people and create the water which we swim in, which helps you leap, to take risks, to have a sense of newness. There's that whole joy of being in the organizations like that. And there's other organizations where you look over the edge of those risks and you go, I'm not jumping. So what's the difference and how do we create them? And just to give it a little bit of science, I've been reading this amazing book by these two guys, Christakis and Fowler, and what they've done, they're from California University and Harvard, and they've plotted how energy flows through systems. So scientifically looking at actually how happiness flows, how creativity, energy flows, how sadness flows. And so in this particular one, it's actually a map of friendship and relationship groups. And the yellows are people who are happy. And the dark blues are the people who are the saddest. And you can see that the saddest folks on this map end up on the edge. They're kind of slightly isolated, and the kind of like the yellows are kind of more clustered towards the middle broadly. And what is interesting about this research is it's not that happy people meet happy people. It's actually causal. What they've done is they've edited out all those kind of facts, and they've said actually happy people create happy people. Yeah, it's actually ripples out. And so what they're saying is actually, if you're with a person who's happy, you're more likely to be 15% happier yourself. And this effect goes on to a friend of a friend at 10%. So, and if you're even a friend of a friend of a friend, creates a ripple of 6%. So actually, just think about that. You know, and this effect, by the way, you think these are quite small numbers. That 6% is bigger than the effect of somebody giving you £10,000. Yeah. So it's kind of like, it's bigger than quite a large amount of money to have a friend of a friend of a friend who's happy. So this is about how energy moves through organizations. So our hypothesis is that transformational leadership emerges from a creative frequency, not a process. That the way we think, we relate and learn and organize brings us either towards this energy and this frequency or away from it. And the leadership of our challenge of our time is to tune these frequencies. So that's the hypothesis we are playing with in Nowhere. I just want to step back because I see a lot of businesses and this frequency either exists or it's not. And for me, there's a big problem which we've got in our organizations, a very big problem. And it looks something like this. Sorry, I'm going too quickly. Quite often, go backwards. I don't know if I can do this, but I'll come back to it. Yeah, ignore that. But people come to us and say, we've got a problem, and usually that problem is it's a ceiling of performance, it's a ceiling of growth, it's a sense of being stuck and not knowing why. And so there's this sense of, that's why they call in us typically, and it's like an intuitive sense. And I think what we're seeing is that a lot of cultures are being based around what I would call high-performance organizations, or achiever-based organizations. The equivalent, the characteristics of these organizations are that they have a strategy, they know where they're going, they've codified the steps, and they're really just aligning people to those strategies, and they know, and they're pushing towards it, you know. And when that strategy starts to kind of run out of steam, they move towards two options. One is to do more of the same. They just keep saying, we'll just continue. It's somehow some instinctive sense of, we've got a formula, it's worked in the past, let's try and believe that it will continue to work for us. And frankly, that's not enough. And the other kind of choice is for people to work harder, and I see many organizations where people are working 12 hours a day, very intensive, and people are just trying to kind of the level of intensity is going through the roof. And I don't think it's possible to actually work any harder in terms of our global businesses. So we have this threshold, and basically what is happening is that in these businesses you find that kind of people are time poor, that organizations and kind of cultures are becoming fragmented, so there's a lot of silos, that actually because of the pressure things become unsafe. Yeah, that actually there's a lot of unspeakables in them. It's very difficult to say, actually this is no longer working. There's linear, there's a lot of fear, it's quite unhealthy, and it's basically the mentality is push, push, push. Yeah, so we're meeting these kind of challenges. And what we're saying is there's another way, which is a more enlightened way, we think, a more creative way, where actually you meet that with a sense of reclaiming your time. So rather than just push, 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 you actually say, we're going to create different types of space and time, that we can become more integrated, we can work across teams. Actually, we can embrace a culture which is more safe, where feedback is welcomed and dissent is welcomed. And it's more emergent, more purposeful, more fun, And it's much more of a kind of leap. It's kind of actually you go into work and there's a sense of creative possibility every day. So this is the kind of the challenge which we're facing. And what we try and teach people is actually in that challenge, we're balancing and teaching leaders to dance between the known and the unknown. Yeah. So rather than simply stay in what they know and what they think they know and just push into it, actually that they start to use their intuition and they're dancing between their conscious and their unconscious, what the implicate and the explicate, what they kind of know and what is under the surface, and to use kind of more intuitive ways of working. So you'll begin to unlock new thinking. And we call this the creative roller coaster. If you really want to know how this feels, just try and cross a road in Buenos Aires, especially at a pedestrian crossing. You stand there, you kind of take a breath, the green man goes on and you take a step, and actually nobody knows what's going to happen next. This is the key lesson over the last couple of days. So I'm going to quickly flick through this, but basically what we know that actually to move through this threshold, what the scholars tell us, like Bill Torbert, who did some amazing work about 10 years ago about what are the characteristics which really do lead to transforming organizations, that actually organizations move through the achiever phase and can learn the capability to be innovative, to transform themselves. About 12% of organizations who try and do this achieve it. And we know that that's a lot about how teams work, moving from teams who are simply focused on being operational or executing on an existing strategy, and how you learn to teach teams to be creative, to be actually creative minds, and to unlock new thinking. And a lot of the time which we spend is around how do you build creative teams. And finally, we know it's something about leaders themselves moving from places which are just responding and kind of problem solving and trying to solve the immediate problem, to teaching leaders how to evoke a new future, how to kind of be, to actually see new possibilities and take people on a journey. So these are the kind of the levers. 15 years ago, I was working in Barclays Bank in the city of London. Used to wear a kind of pinstripe suit, little kind of handkerchief, shiny shoes, and I literally got to the point I walked into work one day and I just realized I just couldn't do it anymore. It was just like, and that notion of, what do I do? Kind of, I've been doing this for 15 years as a corporate career, and kind of what do you do? So I decided to try and create a business which would shift it. So every time I see that story, I think back of myself and that old self of me. A couple of little glimpses of that would be, I think one of the biggest challenges which we face is that the achiever-based mindset feeds itself, and busyness is confused with productivity. So when you meet organizations, they are so busy, they hardly have any space and time to even think that the world can be different. I was with the CEO of a global bank in Africa, in Johannesburg, a few years ago. He'd just come back from an innovation conference, 2 days, all the banks sharing their strategies, sharing innovation strategies. He said he came back with a blank notebook. There was no new ideas. Everybody had the same strategy, everybody working off the same market intelligence, everybody working off the same strategies. And we had this amazing conversation, and then 2 weeks later, he wrote me this letter. He said, thank you for making contact and sharing your views. It was really refreshing. Shortly after we met, we initiated a significant structural change in our business that we are currently still busy with. The current environment is not conducive to an innovation conversation at the moment. I'd like to reopen this conversation with you in a couple of months. Yeah. Do you know what happened? He didn't come back to me. They're still restructuring. I think they're on their 5th restructure. But actually, we call this the work that gets in the way of the work. There's many organizations which are basically saying, I'm reaching for structure or process to try and solve my innovation challenge. And I think there's a problem with our meetings. We're going to come back to meetings. But the Harvard Business Review basically said, look, this is last year, 65% of senior leaders say that meetings keep them from completing their own work. So meetings are getting in the way, yeah? 71% that said they're unproductive and inefficient. So they're not only getting in the way, but they're actually just a waste of time. And 64% said that they come at the expense of deep thinking. So actually, we're skimming across the surface. We're not getting to the issues. And meetings have become a real problem, I think. And then finally, just the human cost of stretching too far, of stretching our people, stress, burnout, overload, all the statistics which you need to look at are just going through the roof. I know doctors' surgeries in the States which are locating themselves next door to global business headquarters because that's the most profitable places to be, which is the oddest symbiotic relationship I've ever known, and quite sad, but kind of necessarily true. So that's the problem, yeah? We got the problem, kind of like, actually, I just want to give you the second half and hopefully be a bit more optimistic in my last 15 minutes. So as I said at the beginning of this seminar, this talk, is that actually what I do basically is spend my time sitting in circles, getting kind of scientists, academics, leaders, all kinds of people in circles trying to crack problems like, how do you grow wheat in Alaska, when there's only 70 days daylight and you've got to get a seed in the ground, grown and harvested in that amount of time. How do you cure cancer, or at least live with it? How do you bring digital to healthcare so people don't have to go to hospital, they can do all their diagnostic work in the home. These are the challenges which we've been working upon just this year. And I've never had a breakthrough around a table. It's always been in a circle. So my first recommendation is throw out all your tables and just sit in circles if you want to innovate. Actually, it isn't true that I haven't been to South America before. We came to Chile. Where is she? We came to Chile about 5 years ago to Santiago to do some work with an agrochemical company. They took us, we said, we want a room with a circle of chairs. And we ended up above a casino. And we walked in, and the biggest room, biggest table you've ever seen, the board table was that thick. It was wood. It was absolutely solid. And it was bolted to the floor. It took us half a day to find somebody with a drill, with a big thing, and he went, bang, 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 and the whole thing came out of the floor, and we pushed it to one side, and we had the most amazing 3 days. So if anybody tells you that when you try and create a circle in your business and you want to get rid of the tables, that's impossible, just say, Andy says it's not impossible, get rid of the tables, okay? So I want to focus upon two things. I've got about 10 minutes left. And I want to talk about the way we meet. And I think we need to reclaim our meetings. And our meetings need to be about how do we think together. I can't remember when the criteria of a good meeting was a great to-do list or a great set of action points. When did that happen? We need to actually start to say meetings are about thinking together and to come up with new thoughts to difficult problems. And the first movement in that is about how leaders move from taking up space, because we teach our leaders that actually they are experts, that actually they are the source of solving all the problems. And what this happens is actually there's funky dynamics which go on, that when leaders take up too much space, they create competition in their teams, they create in groups and out groups, and they basically get in the way of innovating. So leaders need to learn to take a different position in teams and to hold space, where spaces where their teams can begin to create together and think together and look at the differences they have together, and ultimately to come up with new thinking and new insights. Yeah. So moving from the middle to the side, it sounds lofty and kind of I don't know, non-practical, but this is the most vital thing I think which we're working upon. And when we talk about holding space, quite often I get leaders saying, well, if I'm not the middle, what am I doing? What is my role? And quite often they would say to me, well, I will abdicate. I will somehow step away from my team and hope that my team step up without me. So that I call that abdicating space. And what usually happens is in those situations, teams don't respond. And so there's disappointment, and then the leader gets back in the middle because they don't quite know what to do. So there's a skill in holding space rather than just leaving space open. And these are the skills which we've codified. One is called opening space, simply the capacity for a leader to say, I've got a new idea. Here's a new possibility, to actually open with a breakthrough question. That capacity to innovate and to inspire and to open a new possibility. And the second capacity is building container, which is simply how do you create spaces which are safe to talk and where difference is welcomed and where actually you start to get a much greater kind of safety in your teams. The third one is about working with holding creative tension, which is probably the one which leaders initially, when we speak to them, is the one that they know least about. So this is like holding ambiguity, holding a sense of the unknown, of when heat comes up, you don't collapse it and run to the nearest solution. You say, actually, just keep your nerve. The solution will come through. And, what Bill Talbot calls holding the biggest disturbance in the room, but that's an internal thing. It's about your own internal capacity to hold disturbance. And then ultimately for leaders to know when to catalyze breakthrough. So to not jump to solutions too quickly, but to wait for that moment when heart and mind are aligned and you see the solution and you cut through. So there's something about the capacities. And the other thing about meetings is about what we call moment spotters. We need to become moment spotters. I just see so many meetings which are just full of this kind of noise, holding on what you know, regurgitating old thoughts. I was with an Israeli group the other day, and they're all fighting each other because that's what they do in Tel Aviv. And I gave them a kind of pen and said, you're only allowed to talk if you've got the pen. And they had this amazing conversation. And then I took the pen away. And I said, what was that like? And they said, oh, I really hated that because we couldn't talk over each other, So we had to listen to each other. So so how do we, in this sort of this scenario, these moments come up which get missed. And what we're trying to teach leaders is a very subtle skill where actually they tune into moments, where actually moments are precious. They're almost like green shoots, because any meeting would have 2 or 3 critical moments, and how you do that is amazing, is really important. And I guess there's lots of different types of moments, but think about the moment, for example, when this week, when you may have felt elevated or inspired or enlivened. It might be right now, or it might not be. Or a moment when you sank into a deeper connection with others, where somebody touched you, literally touched you, or offered themselves to you in a different way, and actually it created a different relationship or a different possibility between you. Or it might be a moment when you felt completely out of your comfort zone, that you realized that you were overwhelmed or something was really going wrong. But maybe in that moment you held a little bit inside you rather than being overwhelmed, and you said, okay, I notice this is true. So you registered that moment. Or it might be a moment where something clicked and you knew a new way forward. So we're teaching leaders how to spot these moments, how to cultivate these moments. They're really subtle skills, but effectively what we're trying, there's lots of consequences of not choosing these moments. We stop this. listening, I'll flick through it. But basically, what we're developing is a curriculum, a kind of way of learning, an experiential set of kind of tools and techniques and ways of being which help people basically hold space, tune into moments and think together. And the final thing I want to speak about is the consciousness of leaders. And so to do this, actually there's even a deeper set of thinking which is about how leaders vibrate. You know, literally if we're talking about creative frequency, how do you shift your own creative frequency? You know, to that sense when you meet somebody and you feel the way that they turn up. So we call it about making the visible invisible, that there's a set of archetypal energies which we've borrowed. They're only 35,000 years old because we borrowed them from the Toltecs and the Aztecs and the Native Americans, but they're archetypal. And they really come from the Native American tradition. And we've borrowed them and we've brought them into kind of modern day commercial reality. And just think about the difference about when leaders lead from a place of creative spark, where actually all you get is an amazing creative breakthrough where somebody comes forward with fire, rather than the energy of superior mind. I've got a great idea, follow me. You know, it's kind of like very different in terms of how people vibrate. Or the difference between the nurturer and the sense of knowing that you need to nurture the health and the vitality of yourself and your teams. And if you don't, they will become overwhelmed, their energy will become depleted, and eventually they will become victims. You know, they will feel disempowered. Or the explorer, the capacity to hold the biggest disturbance in the room and not get triggered yourself, as opposed to the energy of the circus mind where you actually just freak out and say, this is either the best thing in the world or the worst thing in the world, and actually how that disrupts the creative process. I can go on. The energy of the warrior, knowing when to cut through, when to move, knowing when to hold, as opposed to the workhorse, which is, we'll get there if we just carry on, you know, over-identified with work, just trying to push our way through. Pathfinder, purpose, as it turns to Maya mind, the next new thing. Shapeshifter, the ability to shift energy in the moment, as opposed to judgment mind, which is, you're wrong, I'm right. You know, and we can cultivate these kind of energies in ourselves. In fact, some of you may be coming to the workshop tomorrow and we're going to spend the whole day looking at these. But actually, so what I'm saying is not only we talk about reclaiming meetings and how we do meetings, but we need to reclaim our own energy and how we lead at a vibrational level. And we're really having a lot of fun with mantras, giving people mantras, little sayings which actually help remind people in the moment of the energy which they're working upon. So I just wanted to share these with you, which some of the leaders which we're working with. All moments are in this moment. To surrender now would be to surrender always, you know, to hold this within you whilst you're doing your work, you know. Mine is be unpopular, because I know I'm wired to over-please, and it kills me. So I've been taught to kind of put down my boundary. And I love this one. What would love say now? Somebody really trying to cultivate the notion of compassion in the nurturer. You know, so actually in that moment when he's really wants to move into push, you say, what would love say now? So you can begin to kind of shift your energy through very subtle ways of kind of mantras, how you start your day, all these sort of things. So energy. I'm going to skip through this. Basically, not only do you work with individuals and teams, but there's ways of creating a choreography which shifts organizations, which we've codified, the way we sequence and choreograph changes, which basically starts up with asking teams to slow down, to speed up, to actually get off the intensity bandwagon and sit back and realize what's going on. When you say this phrase in any corporate these days, there's a kind of deep breath, and you can't say that, slow down. And we work with top teams, with breakthrough teams, giving people a direct experience of breakthrough against their commercial issues. And there's nothing like success which begins to shift the culture and frequency of an organization. And then, as we've said, we have a curriculum which is codifying a way of tuning our culture and helping leaders work with their meetings differently. And there's a sequence and a kind of whole infrastructure about how you would create a journey like that, which is sequenced over time to create a cultural shift. So there's a shift happening, thank God. And it means that actually on the other side of this, our psychological capacities can be magnified, our creativity goes through the roof. All kinds of commercial opportunities open up. We literally lean into the new future. We turn up as the very best possible version of ourselves, and we become happier. And we move from, high performance to moments of peak performance. So that's what's on the other side of this threshold. So many thanks for tuning in. It's been a real pleasure to speak to you and have my opportunity to tell my story rather than holding other people's spaces. So, how long did that take? I have no idea. I got lost.